In this video, we're going to make over this pine chest of drawers. This is a really common piece of furniture that a lot of people would have in their house and that a lot of people would get rid of, but it comes up so nice painted. It's made with good quality timber, so when it's painted, you can give it a whole new look, you can modernise it and really bring it to life. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pop out all the drawers. When you take out the drawers, it's really important that you remember what position they came out of. So I always get a little bit of chalk and write on the back of each drawer what the drawer number is and whether it's the top or the bottom. And this is so that you can pop them back into the same place once they're painted. So I'll number each drawer with just a piece of chalk in underneath, or you could do it with a pencil as well. And I'm going to explain further later in this video why this is so important. So always make sure that you clean your piece first. Never sand it first, always clean it first. And I'm going in with sugar soap. So even if you think it mightn't really need a clean, always just make sure you clean it because you'll be surprised how much dirt and grime can come off. So if you spray it all down with sugar soap, if you have sensitive skin, make sure that you wear gloves. There is no sugar in sugar soap, it's just the name. There is chemicals in it, so just make sure that you're protecting yourself if you have sensitive skin. So I'm going to spray it all down first and leave it sit. And why I'm leaving it sit and rest on the surface is I'm giving it a little bit of time for the product to break down any dirt and grime that is left on the piece, so that'll be easier to wipe away. Then I'm going in with a cloth to wipe off the sugar soap. So I'm going to go in with a lightly dampened cloth and not a damp cloth. So the lightly dampened part is just to make sure that I'm taking any residue that the sugar soap might leave behind. And I'm not going in with a wet cloth because I don't want to risk adding moisture into the wood. So for the drawers, the first thing I'm going to do is remove the handles. And it's really important on the side of the drawers as well to make sure that you don't paint in on this little rung here, because we're using water-based paint, or even any kind of paint is going to add a little bit of moisture in on the wood grain, and then it will swell, and then it's really difficult to get it back into position, especially if the drawer is quite tight in on the frame. So I would suggest just not painting the sides of the drawers unless it's on like a metal rung, that it won't affect the drawer popping in and out. I'm going to remove the screws. I always recommend you do this by hand and not an electrical one, because things can go really wrong with electric. So I'm just going to gently remove the screws and the handle from each of the drawers. Same then with the drawer fronts, spray it down with sugar soap, leave it sit for 30 to 60 seconds and then wipe it off with a lightly dampened cloth to remove any residue. Always make sure that you're wearing a mask when you're sanding. We're going to go in with a sanding block, a medium grade, to get all the awkward areas first. Always make sure that you're sanding with the grain to prevent any scratches. So a medium sanding block is usually about a 120 grit. And I always use a sanding block because it's really handy to hold and get in on those kind of awkward areas with ease. You can also use an electrical sander. I'm using an orbital sander here, and even though it's going in a circular motion, I'm still moving it with the grain. And that's to prevent doing any damage with the sander, like scratching it too deep or anything like that. So what we're doing is we're scuffing the surface. We're not removing the whole layer of varnish that's on this. We're just scuffing the surface. And scuffing the surface just means that when you put the primer on, it has something to really hold on and grip onto. And that increases the durability of the pieces. So that's what we want. We want this to last long. And then I'm just going to go over all the flat surface areas, and like sanding is one of the most important parts when we're prepping our surface, and I think it's the thoughts of sanding that puts people off, but it doesn't take that long. It's very quick, especially if you have an electric sander. For awkward areas like this, I'm just going to get the corner of my sanding sponge and get right into the tongue and groove, because if I use an electric sander, it's not going to hit these areas, and I don't want them to get chipped or anything like that. So just a quick sand with the sanding block before you go back in with your sander. We then need to remove all the dust from our piece as well. So I always go in with a brush attachment that's on a hoover, and I'm going to remove all the dust from the whole piece. I'll take an opportunity as well here to like hoover the back part, hoover all the inside of the piece, hoovering underneath in case there's any cobwebs, which is very common on old furniture, and just hoover absolutely every inch of your piece of furniture. Then at Tack cloth is really good to get rid of that last little bit of remaining dust. So tack cloth has a little bit of beeswax and the dust really clings to it, and I'll give the whole piece a rub down just to get rid of that last little bit of dust. The exact same method then goes for the drawer fronts. So sand and sponge on all those awkward areas and about 120 grit sandpaper, which is a medium sanding block, and then the larger surfaces with an electrical sander. You can also do this by hand, just always make sure that you're going with the grain. For the primer, we're using Crown's FastFlow Quick Dry Primer with Undercoat. Make sure that you give it a really good stir before you begin. This is a water-based product as well, so it's better for the environment, it's easier to clean, and it's got low VOC. It's also a brilliant one to have because it's for interior and exterior use. So you can use it on your furniture indoors and also your garden furniture outdoors. For the priming, I'm going to go and start with the awkward areas first, and I'm going to go in with a sash brush because I really like a sash brush. I think it gets into all those details really well without holding too much paint. So I'm going to do all those awkward areas first on the top and on the grooves. Always make sure to not overload your brush with paint as well. There should never be paint dripping off your brush, and if you go in with a nice light hand and like a feathery motion, if that's what you kind of try and remember when you're painting, and not to go in too heavy handed, nice and light, and make sure to get in all those awkward areas as well. So you might need to kind of maneuver the brush a little bit to make sure that it hits all those like underneath joins. Then I'm going to go in with the microfiber roller to get all those flat surfaces. So starting off on the frame first, and then I'm going to move on to the top and the sides. When you're rolling out your primer onto your piece, you don't need to go too heavy-handed with your roller, as in you don't need to like squeeze your roller down onto the surface. Just go nice and light. Let the kind of roller do the work for you. When you have like a layer on, you might be left with like little lines in between from when the rollers meet. So just go over lightly over those on your finish to make sure that there's no like thicker lines of paint, just to kind of ensure you're getting an even finish. So then we're going to go in and do the scratch test. So I really like to leave the primer sit for like overnight before I do the scratch test. And I could just go in with my nail and I literally try and scrape off the primer. So if the primer comes off at this stage, there's something wrong. Maybe I didn't sand it properly, maybe there was a bit of grime that I didn't see, that's acting as a blocker. But I will test all the different surface areas to make sure that the primer doesn't come off, because now would be the time to rectify it. I always make sure as well that my furniture is raised a little bit off the ground. This is just a piece of timber with some felt to stop the furniture moving and some wheels so that it's easy to move around. And then the exact same process then on the drawer fronts. So awkward areas first with the sash brush, and then with the flower areas a microfiber roller, and then a scratch test. So when we're going in with our satin paint, we're going to use the same process again. I'm going to go in with a sash brush and paint all those awkward areas first. And white can be kind of hard for coverage, so you might need 2 full coats and a top up coat, depending on what colour white you're using. So awkward areas first, and then on the flatter areas a microfiber roller, and roll all the flat surfaces. And don't really worry about getting full coverage here, you'll get that on the second coat. So just kind of worry about getting a nice even coat of paint on all the surface. Once that coat is fully dry, just before the final coat, I'm going to go in with a 240 grit sandpaper and sand back any imperfections that might be on the piece. So if there's a little drip, if there's a little hair from a brush, or if there's a little piece from the microfiber roller, now is the time to just remove that, just to get a super smooth finish. So I'm going along with my hand to try to see can I feel any imperfections on the surface, and then I'm going in with my 240 grit sandpaper and buffing that off. So like there's a little nodule here that I can just sand back so it doesn't affect my final finish, and my final finish would be as smooth as possible. So before you go in with your final touch-ups and final coat, make sure that you're removing all that dust from your sanding with a tack cloth. For this piece as well, I'm going to add some new furniture legs just to give it a bit of height and make it look a little bit different. So I picked up these raw wood legs, and there's like a little plate that I can easily screw into the end of the piece of furniture and screw the legs into. So I need to prime these. I'm going to use the exact same method of priming and painting. And the little silver plates are just attached to the end, and then you screw in the legs. So to paint the geometric designs on the pint chest of drawers, I'm going to do a FastFlow quick dry satin, and these are the colours that I've chosen. I'm going to pop them down to the description box, the exact colours that I've used, and I'm going to go in with painter's tape. So painter's tape is a way better than masking tape. It doesn't bleed, so when you put paint onto it, it doesn't like soak into the tape and then you're left with a jaggedy line. And when you pop it onto a piece of furniture, it doesn't leave any glue residue behind, and more importantly, it doesn't take any of the paint off when you peel it back. For the final design, I'm going to add some geometric shapes onto this piece. So I just made a little template out of card in a triangle just to make sure that everywhere I put a triangle, it's going to be the exact same size. I'm going to use some painter's tape to mark out my triangle so that I can get all the edges nice and sharp. So for the first triangle, I'm just going to place it on one of the drawers, just kind of in the position that I want. You can sketch this out as well if you want to get like a better plan in place for where you want to exactly put every triangle. But I'm just going to put on one triangle and work from that. So I'm just getting my painter's tape in the position that I want on all three sides. And the little trick as well with when you're using painter's tape is to make sure that with your thumb you're really pressing down on the tape to make sure that it's totally adheres to the surface so that no paint can seep in underneath and give you a jaggedy line or a warped line. So I'm just going to pop in the first colour, and I'm going to put a nice light coat. I don't want to put a big thick heavy coat on this because what it'll do is you'll see like the ridges from all three sides, so just nice and light. One light coat and then a second coat on top will do fine. So while the first layer is drying there, I'm going to start adding on more triangles. So I'm just playing around with positions, and I'm going to do the exact same process again. So I'm just going in with my second colour, so again, nice light layers. Now when you're using painter's tape, you do not have to wait for the paint to dry before you peel back the paint. They do recommend that you can peel it back straight away. So after the second coat, I don't wait for the paint to dry. I literally get my second coat on, and once I'm happy with that, I go in and I peel back the tape. When you're peeling back the tape, just go nice and gently, like don't rip it off really fast because you can do a little bit of damage. So just make sure that you're taking your time and that you're just peeling it back gently. Once you're happy with your design, then you're just going back in to do final touches. This is my favourite thing to do. So just going back in, tidying up any triangles that need to be tidied. If I need to straighten up any lines, I can go back in and just give it another coat if needs be. But that little stage at the end is definitely my favourite part. And then a nice, really easy, quick change, even if you didn't paint it, is a new set of handles. A new set of handles can do a huge amount for a piece of furniture. It can make it look more expensive, and it can really tie a look together.